The San Francisco Board of Supervisors is at this very moment discussing a new proposal that would dictate how the police department can use its military-grade weapons. This includes robots that could, in some situations, be used to kill people. Joining us live now is senior reporter for the SF Standard, Michael Barba. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I know you've been monitoring this meeting closely. Where are they at with this? Are they close to voting?
The hearing just started about 15 or 20 minutes ago, so we're still hearing from just some of the supervisors so far, so we don't have a vote yet.
Okay, so what exactly is the police brass proposal with regard to killer robots?
Yeah, so this all started because there's a new state law that requires police departments around California to basically disclose what military equipment they have and come up with rules for how they want to use them. So as part of that process, the police department basically said, hey, we have these bomb disposal robots, and we would like the option to be able to use them to apply deadly force as a last resort.
So if those are bomb detonation robots, does that just mean you would use the detonation to possibly kill in some situations, or would they wouldn't arm them with guns or do anything different to modify them, right?
I don't think they're talking about attaching guns to the robots. I think what they're talking about is basically attaching some sort of explosive to the robot and using the robot to deliver the explosive in a situation like an active shooter who would be potentially too dangerous for a police officer to approach, kind of like we saw in Dallas back in 2016.
Dallas 20, I was thinking Uvalde, in that situation where also they believe the hostages or people may have died, but the gunman is maybe heavily armed. And is there this fear of police confronting them in this day and age, kind of looking at those incidents?
Yeah, so the way the policy is written, it would basically only allow the department to use the robots in this way if it was a last resort, if there was no other force option that they could use that would resolve the situation. And I think the intention of the police department is to use it in mass shooting situations like that. The reason I brought up Dallas is because that was a situation where the police actually used a bomb disposal robot to detonate and kill an active shooter.
I see. And what was the aftermath of that? What was the public response?
I think people were just trying to figure out how it happened, and were surprised to hear that it happened at the time. I think the notion of a killer robot has really shocked and stunned a lot of people, especially with the police proposal that we have before us now. I know a lot of members, or at least some members of the Board of Supervisors, are just really puzzled that, that this is even being considered right now. At the same time, you have other members who say that the police department should be able to use whatever tools that it could to save lives, potentially.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the arguments for. What are some of the arguments against that some of the supervisors or members of the public are putting forth? What is their fear?
I think the fear is that, if these robots were to use deadly force, it would somehow make police killings easier. There could be a situation where, a human doesn't have to necessarily pull the trigger. The robot can do it, even though it's being controlled by the human. And the other fear is that, it would be harder for someone, a family potentially, to seek justice if the robot was the one who actually pulled the trigger. Again, on the other side of things, the police are emphasizing that these are not autonomous robots like you might see, in some sort of sci-fi movie. These are robots that are controlled by trained officers.
Right. I think that's the big fear when you say killer robots. It conjures up images people have of sci-fi movies, right? You're just doing your business and then a drone flies overhead and starts shooting at you or something. So this is not that. But let's talk about what the decision-making process is. Would it be subject to the same type of process we have now in terms of, okay, it is time to use potentially lethal force, and, who decides and how do they decide? Is that going to be the same?
It's really not articulated in the policy. The policy just says that this person that they would be using deadly force against would have to be an imminent or immediate threat. They would have to be potentially about to kill somebody else. and that the police department would have no other option but to use deadly force with these robots. That said, I think the board is going to consider right now adding one more layer to the decision-making process where, the officer who would be using this robot would have to get approval from his high-ranking superior as a chief, the chief himself, or assistant chief or deputy chief, I believe.
Right. And obviously they have to make sure there wouldn't be collateral damage or other people hurt in the process. So, Michael, let me ask you, would this require the spending of any additional money? Because if you're talking about using the bomb detonation robots that they have, right, does it cost any more?
This whole process was really about the police department just disclosing to the public what equipment it already has. I don't believe the police department right now is considering buying any more of these robots. At least that's not what they're proposing.
I see.
They're just telling the public, here's what we have, here's how we want to use it. And through that process, they realized, well, we don't want to take this, the potential to use deadly force off the table, right? Because the supervisor who was negotiating with them, Supervisor Aaron Peskin, he actually wanted to say, let's restrict these robots from using any force at all. The police department realized, well, there may be a situation where there's an active shooter where we might, want to use these robots to resolve it. And the situation that the assistant chief just right now at the Board of Supervisors brought up was the Las Vegas mass shooting at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. He thought that might be a situation where they could have used a deadly robot.
Right.
And I think some supervisors are going to disagree with him.
All right. Interesting discussion. At least the public is aware of it's happening. So, Michael, thank you very much for joining us. Keep us posted.